Welcome to Inside Israel Explained. I'm Joel Chasnoff. On this, our very first explained episode of Inside Israel, I'm going to talk about the late professor, Dr. Daniel Kahneman. As you may have heard, Kahneman passed away just a few days ago at the age of 90. But his work really holds a special place in my heart because I wrote about Kahneman and his work in my recent book, Israel 201. I did reach out several times hoping that I could actually get a face-to-face interview with him. It did not pan out in the end. Nevertheless, I researched his work quite heavily and found it not only fascinating, but so relevant to everything happening in the world right now, and specifically to what's happening in Israel now in early 2024, and even more specifically, why it is that Israel is losing the PR war in our conflict with Hamas, with Gaza. So some background. Kahneman and his lifelong academic partner, Amos Teversky, worked at Hebrew University. And in 2002, Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics. Somewhat ironically, his work with Tversky was not really about economics. It was about decision making. And what they found is that contrary to popular belief, human beings are actually completely illogical when it comes to making decisions, not just in the world of economics, but really in the world at large. What they found is that instead of thinking deeply and slowly, what we human beings tend to do is think quickly by relying on heuristics. Heuristics are basically just shortcuts to help us arrive at the easiest answer, though not necessarily the correct answer. In one example they give in their book, which is actually Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which I highly recommend, one example they give is the availability heuristic. So if I were to ask you, are there more words in English that start with the letter R or have the letter R in the third position of the word? Most people would say that there are more words that start with the letter R, even though there are actually more words that have the letter R in the third position. So why do we say that there are more words that start with the letter R? The reason is because we simply have more of those words readily available in our mind. We can more easily think of words that start with R. It's more difficult for us to think of words that have R in the third position. So even though there are more of those, we say that there are more that start with R because there are more of those available. Another heuristic that they talk about is simply the exposure bias, that we tend to like things the more we're exposed to them. And this is why I find that Israel is losing the PR war, or at least it's one of the reasons. There are so many more videos and social media posts about the Palestinian people in Gaza and about the suffering in Gaza, the destruction in Gaza, that people have accepted these as the truth. It's a classic case of people using a heuristic. We think, what could Israel do better to get our message out there? Really, one of the reasons that Hamas is winning the PR war is that they just have so much more content out there and available, even if it's not true, even if it's false. People are hearing it so much, they're exposed to it so much more than they are to the more complicated Israeli narrative that they're simply going to like it more and believe it. So that's one of the reasons I find Kahneman's work so relevant to what's happening today. Now, as for the reason that I wrote about Kahneman in my book, Israel 201, it's because of his work for the Israeli army. One of the very unique aspects of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, is that we have a very unique way of interviewing incoming soldiers to determine where they will best serve in our military. The numbers aren't exact, but by estimations, it's been found, it's said, I've heard that the IDF drafts between 30 and 50,000 18-year-olds a year. Now think about that, 30 to 50,000. If that were a company, that would be a major operation in the manpower human resources division to recruit 30 to 50,000 new employees every year. And yet that's what the IDF does year after year. And it's very complicated, very complex to figure out where each 18-year-old would best serve this huge operation known as the IDF. But back when he was a soldier, Daniel Kahneman came up with a process called the open question interview. These are interviews where in just a few minutes, the interviewee can ask some open-ended questions to the 18-year-old recruit. And by listening to the answers to these questions, the interviewee can have a very good sense of how well this person will function in a group, how well this person will function under stress, how good of a leader this person will be, and how likely it is that this person will respect authority. So instead of long multiple choice questionnaires or long interviews, this very short open-ended interview with the correct questions asked can actually very quickly help the IDF determine where each of these 30 to 50,000 soldiers will best function in the very complicated system called the IDF. So that is why I wanted to call a little attention to Daniel Kahneman today. He's done so much work on behalf of Israel through his service in the IDF as a soldier when he developed this interview process, but also for the world in general. And I think it's worth thinking about how important and relevant his work is as we see just how many obstacles Israel is facing in terms of getting our message out there. And maybe we should rethink how we think about our messaging, that it's not necessarily what we're saying, but just how we're saying it, how much exposure we are giving to people, how available our message is. That could be the key to helping us win the PR war. I hope you've enjoyed this very first edition of Inside Israel Explained. Until next time, I'm Joel Chasnoff, and you can find more about this podcast on my website, joelchasnoff.com/podcast.